Hello and welcome to Biogas TV. We're here every Monday talking about all things biogas related. I'm Paul Green and I run a biogas advisory business. I'm here with my co-host Alex McFarland with RNG Connect and Drew Puchot from Equus Energy. We're continuing to feature the nominees for the Giants of Biogas Award. The winners will be announced later this week. The Giants of Biogas are for those who truly move the needle over the years in our industry. Today's episode is sponsored by Sentry Water Tech. Sentry's VFA controllers allow for the only true real-time analytical technology about the health of a digester. By sampling digester contents from VFA on the fly, system operators can optimize feed rate and ultimately project revenue by pushing feed rates as hard as practical. Find them online at www.sentrywatertech.com. Our guest today is Bryan Sievers with Roeslein Renewables. Bryan operates a grain and livestock farm in Iowa on land that's been in his family for over 150 years. In 2022, the Sievers planted significant perennial prairie on their farm that will enhance the sustainability of their farm operations while providing multiple ecosystem services for the community. In 2013, they commissioned their 1 megawatt CHP anaerobic digester system. Their biogas system processes beef, cattle manure, plus food waste from major processors in the region, along with biomass from winter hardy cover crops and native perennial prairies. They return all of the nutrient-dense soil amendments to their farmland in the form of nutrient-rich organic matter fertilizers. In 2022, Bryan and his wife, Lisa, partnered with Rudy Roeslein, founder of Roeslein Renewables, to form a new company called Horizon 2. This new company produces RNG for use as a transportation fuel. The injection of RNG into the national pipeline grid was the first of its kind in the U.S. from beef cattle manure. In Feb 25, Roeslein Renewables and Horizon 2 were awarded ISCC Plus and ISCC EU certifications for biomass feedstocks used in RNG. This is the first ISCC certification in the US for biomass-based crop residues, including cover crops, beef cattle manure processed for clean burning RNG. In 2022, October, Roeslein Renewables, Sievers, family farms, and 13 partners were awarded an $80 million grant from USDA's Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities program titled Horizon 2, Climate Smart Future for Corn, Soybean, Livestock, and RNG Production. And lastly, in February 2026, the Horizon 2 grant was approved and renewed in the USDA's Advancing Markets for Producers initiative. Bryan is now Director of Government Relations for Roeslein Renewables. He got his degree in ag business and has served 2 terms in the Iowa legislature. He recently served as Vice Chair of the ABC Board of Directors and co-chairs its Agricultural Committee and Policy Committee. Hello, Bryan. Congratulations on being a Giants of Biogas nominee. Happy spring and welcome to the show. Are you muted?
There we go. Thank you
There we
very
go.
much, Paul, for that warm and generous introduction. Glad to be here.
Yeah, you're welcome. So how to start? I think we were going to kick off by you were going to tell us a little bit about Roeslein Renewables, Rudy's vision, and some of the exciting work you're doing there on prairie grasses and the big
Yeah.
picture, weren't we?
Yeah, we kind of wanted to merge or marry the two, I guess, visions, if you will, that our family has had for, as you alluded to, over 150 years here in Eastern Iowa. And, fast forwarding up to back in January 1 of 22, when we partnered with Rudy Roeslein and his partners on our anaerobic digester project that we had commissioned back in 2013. So when Rudy and his team came on board as our partners, we expanded our facility. We went from 970,000 gallon CSTRs that we were processing beef cattle manure in, as well as some pre-consumer food waste from area food processing facilities. And then as we expanded our digesters to a lagoon style digester, we actually then are operating that sequentially, where we run our beef cattle manure through the CSTRs and then into the lagoon for additional digestion. So we're adding probably another 15 days of hydraulic retention time as a result of that technology and expansion. And it's really kind of taken Rudy's vision of incorporating then biomass with manure sources, and that biomass could come from things like winter hardy cover crops, which we've been doing for a number of years, blending those in with our manure. We harvest those in the spring before we plant our next cash crop, which is generally soybeans following that cereal rye cover crop. And or as you alluded to, we planted some prairie here 3.5 years ago and are now harvesting a portion of that every year, and either using that as bedding for our cattle in our cattle barns, or we'll process it and grind it up and directly add that, just like we do the cover crops with our into our reception pit with our manure sources. So it's taking that vision that Rudy has of restoring. His vision is to restore 30 million acres of the upper North American grasslands area that once contained 180 million acres of native prairie that has dropped now down to 3 million acres. We actually, or Rudy believes that that's actually part of our issue when it comes to the whole climate change conversation, that by not able to have that green energy crop out in the field 12 months out of the year, we're actually losing the ability to capture and store energy, especially during the fall, winter, and early spring, when the ground might be bare after harvesting crops and before planting of the next crop. So it really does have some sound science behind why he would like to see this vision fulfilled, where we take marginal lands, maybe highly erodible lands, maybe strips along rivers, creeks, streams, ponds, other natural waterways, and seed those down to prairie, and then be able to intermittently harvest those as a feedstock for anaerobic digestion, but also provide multiple ecosystem services, and that's enhanced wildlife, improved water quality because of the root system that those prairies contain, and also provide habitat for deer, upland game birds, beneficial insects, as well as maybe even monarch butterfly habitat. Because we do seed when we reseed and put reconstructed prairie on the landscape, we ensure that we seed milkweed as part of our species mix. So that vision, if you will, has kind of helped motivate us here in our project in Iowa to incorporate those feedstocks with our beef cattle manure. And then we're also going to, as I mentioned earlier, we've been processing pre-consumer food waste for a number of years. We actually stopped doing that. We still take the food waste. We've just been mixing it with our liquid effluent and land applying that, but we intend to start digesting that again here in 2026. We stopped doing it mostly because of the D3, D5 RIN issue that EPA has imposed on food waste versus D3 feedstocks like manures. So, again, sound science would support digesting those feedstocks, but the regulatory framework doesn't really provide an incentive to do so. So we're basically going to build another digester here in the future and process our food waste separately from our D3 feedstocks to still
So
take.
Bryan,
Yes.
um, so it's a fascinating story and a lot going on there. And this is we're a biogas show, but it strikes me that the biogas plant in this vision of prairie restoration, it's a part of the story, right? It's serving an
Absolutely.
important part. It seems like, it's a part of the economic model of ecological restoration, actually, where, okay, now you've got some prairie grasses that you're harvesting. So there's so I guess you're the plant is maybe buying these feedstocks to produce
Mhm.
energy. Maybe there's some carbon credits that are going along with the prairie restoration. And so I think, it's very interesting to think about what our, the perception out there can be that, oh, biogas plant is just something that you slap onto the back end of a CAFO, so big farmer, big ag can make more money. But in fact, in this case, it seems like the digester is an essential component of a much bigger plan, which is really fascinating.
It's actually the central part of Rudy has this Venn diagram, which is conservation, wildlife, and energy production. And that digester sits right in the center part of it. And that's what's allowed us in our family, we've tried to transition from a linear farming model to a circular model. And that Venn diagram, Rudy's vision, all kind of allow us to bring that home to adopt a circular model where, one part of our farming operations, waste becomes a resource for the next step in that circular model. That's the key part is that, we love the circularity of this approach. We love the fact that anaerobic digestion sits right in the center of that approach.
Yeah, and grazers have an important role to play
Right.
in prairie as well.
Yep, exactly. And what's beautiful is that in my role as Director of Government Relations is I get to work with environmental groups. We work with Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, Ducks Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy, even Environmental Working Group and Environmental Defense Fund, some of the folks that maybe traditionally we haven't been able to work with. They like this idea of incorporating a model where you're maximizing ecosystem services. Everybody's got to, give and take in this. And they understand that if they want to see additional benefits derived for conservation and wildlife and environmental outcomes, they realize there's going to have to be some give as well because we still have to feed now over 8 billion people on this
Yeah.
earth. And that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Brian, so much of what we talk about is dairy as far as biogas, ADR&G. How have you been able to crack the code on the beef side of things? I know a lot of people have talked about beef manure. You're one of the few out there actually doing it. How have you been able to pull that off?
So it's been challenging, not going to lie. We didn't have access to the LCFS because beef cattle manure was not considered a tier one pathway in CARB's framework. So we've been doing it through the voluntary markets. Honestly, we've been selling a lot of our gas on the voluntary basis. Uh, once I think at some point in this year, we're going to have to make a decision on whether we're going to go ahead and just start selling through the regulated market again and tapping into the RFS. One of the things that I mentioned or that I failed to mention earlier is that we're also pursuing a pathway for cereal rye cover crops as a D3 RIN feedstock. And if we get that pathway petition was submitted in April of 24, so 2 years now it's been there. And we hope to get that petition sometime soon, hopefully in the next 6 months, maybe even sooner. And if so, then our beef cattle manure with the cereal rye cover crops will be eligible all as D3 RIN feedstocks. Will probably go back into the RFS and sell into the regulated market. And then the next step will be to pursue a pathway for the prairie feedstock we talked about. So it's been challenging, but the voluntary markets fortunately have been there to help us out, and we've been selling gas into that market for a couple of years now.
So you flipped to RNG. Is your CHP still running?
Yes, we actually run that off the brown gas. One of the changes that occurred in the set rule was that we put our meter just a few feet beyond our gas upgrade skid and buy gas back to run our genset on. So we're providing heat for our plant and generating electricity and selling that onto the grid. That, of course, doesn't go with, we don't get credits for that because we're using brown gas to produce the electricity. But nevertheless, it does generate some revenue for the project on top of the RNG sale.
Yeah. Do you want to hit on maybe any additional you want on your farm or Rudy's vision, but some of the policy work you've been up to lately?
Yeah, just maybe to conclude is that, we're still continuing to allow this vision of Rudy's to evolve. I think I wanted to mention that the grant that we received that was terminated a year ago when the Trump administration terminated all climate smart commodities grants, we were also invited to reapply under the new AMP program that USDA installed to replace the Climate Smart Grant program. And we had our grant accepted, our grant application accepted last month. And so we're in the process of re-engaging now, and we'll be back to hopefully signing up producers to seed more prairie down and to also, look at processing more feedstocks from our cover crops in that grant program. And that whole grant will continue to focus on the measuring, the monitoring, the reporting and verification of this process so that we can really understand what are the costs associated with this approach of bringing in biomass or cellulosic feedstocks, what are the benefits, and really then transitioning to the policy side of things, 45Z, we think, is going to give us an opportunity to take what we look at. I'm still going to refer to them as climate smart farming practices because a lot of us became familiar with that term. I think the new acronym is low carbon farming practices, because that may very well be a part of the final 45Z rules that are implemented here this year. And if so, that's going to allow us to potentially monetize the practices that we've been employing on our farm, things like no-till and growing cover crops or prairie, to help augment or enhance the value of the 45Z production tax credit that we'll get once we produce the renewable natural gas on the back end. So that's the transition, if you will, to policy. The implementation of this 45Z has been probably our number one priority since last July when the One Big Beautiful Bill was passed. And 45Z became a big part of that legislation, specifically allowing for negative carbon intensity scores from livestock manure based renewable natural gas. We've been working with USDA, Department of Energy, now Treasury, other agencies. I would say within USDA, have been working a lot with some of the senior political advisors, the chief economist's office, to help ensure that we get successful 45Z implementation. Just as a reminder to everyone, the comments for 45Z are due at 11:59 p.m. Eastern tonight. So I would encourage any one of your listeners, if they haven't filed some comments in support of 45Z, this is the day to do it. Roeslein will actually be filing our comments later today as well. But we think that this is probably going to be the best opportunity to move the industry forward with this legislation of any time in probably the last, ever since the RFS was first adopted and allowed for RNG to access the RFS program. So probably in the last 20 plus years.
What can you advise us to in terms of comments? What would you like to see? We can maybe help us all out.
Right. We've just really been advocating for fairness and equity in the implementation. It really does get into the nuance of this process, things like making sure that they are species specific, which the legislation calls out. So swine is treated differently than dairy, which is treated differently than, say, poultry or beef. We want to make sure beef cattle manure is included in that. There are a number of potential projects that I think will develop if it is, and I fully believe that they will include beef cattle manure in the 45Z. It would be a huge miss if they don't. And then finally, manure management specific practices. So things like anaerobic lagoons, much like they're treated in, say, California's GREET model. We need to make sure that they specify the specific manure management practices that are employed by each of those projects to maximize the production tax credit associated with that. So what we're seeing in some of our calculations is if you have a lagoon on a dairy, you're probably going to be looking at CI scores in the 45Z model once it's fully implemented. And if we're successful in our lobbying efforts, of negative CI scores in the range of negative 250 to negative 400. And that's going to be a huge win for the industry. For dairy, we're going to see something similar for swine. Beef cattle manure will probably be about 75 to 80% if we're successful in getting that, especially if we include an anaerobic lagoon component for beef cattle manure in the calculations like there is for dairy and swine. So those are some of the things. Manure management specific, species specific, include beef cattle manure in the calcs. And then for a few of us that have an anaerobic lagoon system or had an anaerobic lagoon system, making sure that there's a toggle or a cell for that particular type of manure management practice for beef cattle manure as well.
All
Question
right.
came in from
Get
Kevin.
some marching orders.
Well,
Yeah, there you go.
Question came in from Kevin, curious about beef manure as a feedstock. Are you feeding in the bed pack or only litter alley manure? Do you do any pre-processing ahead of the digester?
Yeah, we do. We have a scraper system, so we scrape daily, 24 hours a day, I should say, into the reception pit. And then the bedded pack in the center. So we have a combination. We have liquid slurry that comes in 24 hours a day from our scraper system. And then when our cattle leave that pen, we clean the pen out. The bedded manure pack gets cleaned out, and we start over with fresh bedding. And then we stockpile that bedded manure pack, and we feed that into our reception pit as well. So we feed both the bedded manure pack as well as that slurry that comes every day.
Mhm. Good. I guess back to 45Z. So right now, the current thought on its expiration, it reads 2029, correct? So, when you think of developing opportunities based on 45Z, by the time you would develop and you'd finance and you'd engineer and you'd build it, you're into 2028, which doesn't give you a lot of time on
Right.
45Z. So at some point, do you think there's appetite for getting that extended?
Well, that's what we're going to work on as an industry. It needs to be extended. There's already legislation that's been introduced to extend it out to 2033.
Yeah.
There's no question that those in the business development side of the industry are saying we need at least a 10-year run on this credit. I fully agree with that, but right now we've got 4, and we need to extend that out. But keep in mind, just about every renewable energy tax credit that I'm aware of, wind, solar, biodiesel, they've all had short-lived PTCs that have been extended for year after year after year. It's
Yeah.
usually a political challenge, but wouldn't a little more certainty be a nice thing for an industry to have? So that's our job really in the government relations community and the trade associations, the ABC as well as RNGC, is to continue to advocate for extending this PTC. But we don't want to get the cart in front of the horse. We want to make sure that the implementation is done fairly and equitably, and that's our job not only today, but then May 28th, there's going to be a scheduled hearing. Public in-person testimony can be provided. And I think the deadline to sign up for that is today as well. So if you have any interest in coming to DC and testifying in front of the IRS, much like we did with the 48 ITC about 4 years ago, then here's an opportunity to do that once again. And I know Raceline's got a couple of folks signed up already to testify, and we think it'll be another way to just reinforce that message of the importance to the rural communities, to agriculture, to the efforts to recycle our waste streams, to ensure that the implementation of this new tax credit gets done right, and then also make the pitch for we'd love to see it extended as we move towards 2029. But the other thing I would just say about that is that we're already having discussions here in Iowa about potentially creating state programs modeled after that 45Z. And I think that that's where we might have even a higher level of potential success. I can see Iowa, for example. I can see a lot of the Midwestern states kind of competing against each other, if you will. We joke about we want to see Western Iowa and Eastern Nebraska, maybe Southeastern South Dakota, maybe even part of Kansas become the next Central Valley here in the Midwest with a lot of dairy and swine and maybe even some beef cattle operations. So there's going to be some real competition, I think, in the state to create a model for this within our state legislatures, create our own PTC for biogas. Yes, maybe create that new model so that it starts the day that the federal tax credit expires, and we can continue to see that PTC in place for maybe a 10-year window after 2029 at the state level. So that's kind of our plan B, if you will. If we aren't successful at the federal level, which I hope we will be, of getting an extended, then let's create our own state models
Yeah.
and pit Iowa against Nebraska, because I'm pretty sure Nebraska's not going to let Iowa take the lead on this versus Minnesota, South Dakota, and some of the other Midwestern states.
And of course, 2026 is the year of biogas in the maritime space, right?
Yes,
The maritime
absolutely.
year.
It's the year we finally recognize the potential opportunity that exists. Going back to October of last year when the Trump administration kind of led the effort to kill the proposal that was on the table at the MEPC within the International Maritime Organization. There was a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of consternation that was going to kill what we thought was going to be a tremendous opportunity. There is a reset going on within the administration. We've had several meetings with State Department, and we have more scheduled. There is strong support to continue to be engaged with the IMO, to go back to the table with a new proposal. In fact, there's new proposals already been drafted by Argentina and Panama that will create a different approach to incentivizing the use of biofuels as the transitional fuel. That was the main concern is with the Trump administration's number one, they didn't like the idea of having a $5 billion fund that was under the control of the United Nations. That was one issue that they raised. And then the other one, as a result of this kind of quote carbon tax that would be created from those who continue to use the dirtiest bunker fuels to fuel the international maritime shipping industry. And then the other thing was just not making sure that biofuels in general had a long enough runway as a transitional fuel. There was, I think, in the proposal that was on the table last fall, they were literally going to start limiting for example, the use of LNG in 2030 already as a transitional fuel. We thought that was way too short. The administration said, no, we need a much longer runway, probably out to 2050 at a minimum for these transitional fuels. And these transitional fuels from our industry perspective are bio LNG. So, that, Paul, I know you've been using that term, and that's a term that we need to continue to look at using as one way to comply with the new international maritime opportunity, but also others in the biofuels arena that might be methanol, it might be
Biomethanol, yeah.
biodiesel. So there's a lot of opportunities we think going forward for all of the biofuels. This size of this pie is so large that we should not have to really argue over how big of a slice we get, because there's plenty for everyone in the potential for this shipping opportunity.
Good. So a lot to chew on there. I'm putting your email in the chat here. So if anybody is interested in finding you, here's your email, and find Bryan on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, thank you so much for your service. I know you and I have been around this ABC world for, gosh, it's been a long time, 15 plus years.
That's
And
right.
it's always I always admire people that just keep showing up, and that's Bryan Sievers for you. You're just always there. You keep showing up, and you're so open and forthcoming with all of your knowledge and all of your good strategic thoughts. So
Thank
I'm
you.
going to jump over to Drew here for our offtake roundup. Unless you got anything last comments for us, Bryan, we good?
We're good. Thank you very much, Paul. And thank
Wonderful.
you for doing this as well for all of
Good.
us.
Yeah, good. All right. Drew, you got some wisdom for us on the offtake roundup today?
Yeah, and Bryan, that was very enjoyable to listen to. I'd love to catch up with you more. Also, would love to hear more about your experience in the voluntary market. But let's jump into New Mexico real quick, because I think that's an important state to take a look at, since the Clean Transportation Fuel Standard program in New Mexico started on April 1st. So we're almost 1 week into a new LCFS program, or a new, as they call it, Clean Transportation Fuel Standard. In the first year, we'll be looking at a baseline reduction of 1.8%, but that grows to 20% by 2030 and 30% by 2040. So there's a somewhat aggressive, you know, ramp up there on credit demand. And we're looking at, two kind of schools of thought that we've been discussing on the desk here at our office today and in the last week. In that, a big consideration will be a question about how much ethanol is currently available to supply into that market relative to the size of the market. It is a small market, but there's a good indication that by 2028 and beyond, we'll be looking at a significant deficit in credit generation in that market. And it'll also be interesting to see how that kind of continues to compete for low CI products such as RNG across California, Oregon, Washington, and Canada. We saw a significant lag in new project development in 2025, late 24 through most of 25. And we're already seeing some indications that low CI projects are pulling out of California and moving to Canada. But New Mexico has an interesting application process that it looks like is going to be a little bit easier to get through than California or Canada. So we think it's a definite target of opportunity.
Cool. Well, good. We have a new state. Yay.
Indeed.
Good. All right. Well, Alex, we might wrap it here. You got any other questions for Bryan or Drew? We good?
No, we're good. Bryan, thanks very much. Just a fascinating story, and underlies how versatile anaerobic digestion really is, and yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. And thank you again, Paul, for hosting this. opportunity and really appreciate all you do for the industry, Paul.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a lot of fun. So with that, that ends today's episode. Next week, we've got Lauren Toretta, CH4 Biogas, going to talk about food waste and dairy manure co-digestion. So be sure to tune in again next week. We'll see you guys later.